Dragon Ball Z games have never been seen as masterful. They usually exhibit some sort of fun factor, with some of them going on to receive critical acclaim. Takatsu, on the other hand, could not have been made by a human being. No person with half a brain would have left this game the way it is, completely unfinished. It offers 4 initial modes of play. You've got tournament, endurance, time challenge, and training, but there is no goal to beating any of the different modes, since the unlockables contribute nothing special to the game. The selection of fighters is a predictable mix of heroes and villains from across the Dragon Ball Z universe, but the actual gameplay is on the verge of being totally broken. For starters, the hitboxes are wildly inconsistent. Characters will slide across the screen seemingly at random, and they'll pop up over to the other side of one another when in close quarters combat. The actual fighting itself is sloppy and simplistic, with every character only having a few combos outside of the catalogue of punches and kicks that all of the characters share. The only component of Takatsu that's even moderately original is the Sky Battle mode, where both characters will jump up into the air and exchange a quick volley of punches and kicks, but all you need to do to come out on top here is mash buttons. Overall, it simply feels like a clone of the far superior Super Nintendo fighters, bundled in a package for the Game Boy Advance. However, instead of actually improving the game, they have actually made it worse. If you have one of the Super Nintendo fighters, I highly suggest you play those instead, because you will not find anything new here. In fact, you'll find something a lot worse. After the huge success of Mario Kart Super Circuit on the Game Boy Advance, it wasn't long until a ton of clones were popping up out of the woodwork, with the most shockingly terrible being Shrek Swamp Kart. Shrek rips off Mario Kart in every gameplay aspect imaginable. By all logic, that should make Shrek Kart a pretty good game, right? You would think so, but Shrek seemingly takes every aspect and proceeds to drive itself into a fucking wall. It features 12 characters from the film, 8 playable races and 4 bosses to defeat and unlock. Players choose their favourite character and race their respective karts around 16 fairy tale racetracks en route to winning the dragon's treasure. All the ingredients for a thrilling racing recipe are clearly present, but the result is a bit of a disaster. You can expect your kart to get caught on invisible walls, spill on obstacles you clearly avoided, and come to a dead halt when you run into other racers, whether you're on the giving or receiving end. Power-ups are represented by tiny sprites that are difficult to make out, and if that wasn't enough, Shrek Swamp Kart is incredibly choppy for a game with such low visual quality. The animation is twitchy and awkward, which all adds up to a pretty uninspired racing experience. Visually, the game is fuzzy and looks dated. The characters are poorly rendered, and as a result, you won't recognize any of them during the actual race. As I mentioned, there are 16 tracks to race around, but aside from the various themes, there's nothing to distinguish one course from another. They're all practically identical in design. This game feels like it was rushed out of the door without receiving the extra polish and attention to detail that makes a game great. I went into Shrek Swamp Kart expecting a fun, over-the-top racer. Instead, what I encountered was an absolute mess. If you ever come across this game in the wild, I highly recommend picking it up. From the graphics to the sound to the gameplay, every element of this game is lacking considerably, just to have the chance to destroy it so there's one less copy in the world. Medal of Honor enjoyed huge success during the days of the PlayStation 1 and would go on to release several entries that soon became some of the greatest first-person shooters on the system. But when it comes to Underground on the Game Boy Advance, the overall feel of the game is rushed and broken. The terrible aiming system is one of the first things you'll notice, as it uses an auto-aim feature that makes it impossible to hit your target unless the computer locks the cursor on for you. The bigger problem is the game does a really bad job at this, and many times will not lock onto a target in plain sight, and sometimes the enemy will even be firing at you at the same time, which makes it extremely frustrating considering they can't miss. Weapon variety is also non-existent. You'll almost never use a weapon other than your handgun throughout the entire game. Aside from all these problems, the game is also incredibly easy, even on the hardest difficulty level. For every 3 enemies in a mission, there will likely be a health pack which restores a third of your life. Enemies never take cover, they stand smack dab in the middle of a room waiting to be shot. And that's not even mentioning the god-awful visuals that heavily impact the gameplay as well. The game environments are so heavily pixelated, you can actually count the pixels. What's even worse, the walls change textures as you move, which can leave you feeling very nauseous. Almost all of the areas within the level look identical, giving it a very boring feel and making it very easy to get lost. I know many say it's not about the visuals and gameplay is much more important, but this performance may make those people regret consider. If you're on the lookout for catching the worst migraine of your life, Medal of Honor Underground is more than up to the task. Mascaratus of the Lost Code is a very simplistic beat-em-up game. In fact, so much so that its own simplicity ends up working against it. Like most games in the genre, the controls are quite simple. Here they boil down to punch, kick, throw and jump buttons. Each character also has a special move that can be executed by pressing both the punch and kick button at the same time. These attacks essentially wipe out everything that's on the screen, which is rather helpful since none of your other attacks seem to be that powerful. Either that or enemies are ridiculously strong, because beyond the first couple of levels, the bulk of enemies you'll face can sustain up to 20 hits before falling. And considering that every level in the game is actually quite short, this insanely high hit count almost seems like a tactic to try and pad out each stage's length. Regardless of intent, the game still doesn't take more than a couple of hours to finish. The only skill you'll need to acquire when playing Mascaratus of the Lost Code is that of cornering an enemy at the edge of the screen so you can hit your attack over and over again until he dies. That's it. Even if there's a swarm of other enemies floating around, they won't often come after you, and when they do, they'll usually only attack once, maybe twice, and then dash off again. This game is so utterly devoid of challenge that actually calling it a game almost seems too generous. There's just nothing here beyond a monotonous affair, and it can be completed with only the slightest of efforts. If you're a fan of the cartoon series, Mascaratus of the Lost Code does nothing of note with its source material, and will only serve to piss you off. R-Type 3 on the Super Nintendo was one of the best shooters on the console and a personal favourite of mine growing up, so as you could imagine, upon hearing the news of a portable version being in the works, I was ecstatic, and then the day came to me actually playing it. Well, where to start? First off, the game is a great looking side-scrolling shooter, which at the very least puts the Game Boy Advance's hardware to good use. But as good as the game looks, it's full of little annoyances that add up to big problems, and it's these problems that hurt the game so much that it makes it not so much fun to play. The hit detection in this game is horrendous. You can blast a fully charged beam of energy into a cluster of foes, and perhaps only half of the enemy ships will be blasted into smithereens. Sometimes you'll fire off a shot that will miss an enemy entirely, yet be at an incredibly close proximity, and that lack of hit detection doesn't just end with enemies. You can be gliding at a decent distance from an enemy and then explode when you get a millimeter closer. You could collide with walls even when you're at a safe distance away. As you progress through the game, the problem never leaves. As you navigate through the narrow and frustrating corridors, you'll have to deal with this unreliable setup that hampers the gameplay more than it helps, and since the levels are usually quite tough to navigate on their own, chances are you'll likely get a headache from all of the random crashes you'll endure. So where does this leave this shooter gone sour? I think that the low quality is evidence of a rushed development, perhaps a potentially scrapped project that was completed half-heartedly. To be perfectly blunt, this game isn't worth the plastic it's encased in. Unless you're a collector, you might want to look elsewhere for your Game Boy Advance shooting needs, or give the far superior Super Nintendo version a go instead. Rockham Sock'em Robots is based on a classic toy that featured two plastic robots battling it out in a boxing match. Players each had a handle with two buttons on it to move the robots on small moving platforms and to make them throw short jabs with their right or left arms. The goal was to place a punch on the other robot's chin in order to cause it to pop up on a spring. It was the kind of toy that was way cooler back in the day before video games, but even in its heyday it would only hold your interest for a short time. With such limited play in the original toy, it's a bit surprising to see it used as the inspiration for a video game. For something like that to work, the developers needed to really take the play to a new level above and beyond what was found with the toy. Unfortunately, that's not the case here. A plastic button mashing mechanical toy is being converted into a simplistic button mashing video game. Control is similar to that of the toy. You push one button to throw a right, the other to throw a left. A little extra control is added in that you can hold a button to charge the punch, and you can use the directional pad to make it high or a low blow. But there's not much strategy to it. Each robot has a health meter that needs to be whittled down before a knockout can occur, and when a robot is on its last legs, the game switches to a KO mode, in which you have to rapidly press the two shoulder buttons to either knock the other robot out or prevent yours from the same fate. This is more annoying than challenging, as the length of time during which you need to keep flipping the buttons is ridiculously long. There's not much gameplay here, and what is here is boring and repetitive. You can pretty much see everything that the game has to offer in less than an hour, and there are plenty of far better ways to kill your time. When it comes to ports on the Game Boy Advance, it was always hit and miss, and Gauntlet Dark Legacy was no exception. It follows the same premise as its home console counterparts, and sees an evil demon who has some connection to some giant monsters and their armies of minions that have taken over large areas of the world. To beat said evil demon, a group of adventurers set out to kill these monsters and collect several hidden runestones to open a portal to the demon's lair. Specifically, there are 4 characters in Dark Legacy. You've got the warrior, the Valkyrie, an archer, and a wizard, who all have their own pros and cons. But when it comes to the actual gameplay, the biggest flaw is just how surprisingly relaxed the action is. Your character seems to run extremely slow over the fairly large levels, and most of the environments are basically empty. There's large areas of undecorated space between enemy generators and objects, which in turn makes backtracking very annoying. This game gives an uphill battle a whole new meaning. You have exactly one move. There is no jump button, no run button, no dodge. You just have to hit. If the enemy is at a distance, you automatically shoot an arrow, throw magic, or whatever it is your character does. It really falls down once you realize in about 10 seconds of play just how limited the combat really is. Holding down the hit button is essentially the entire game. You hold down the button and occasionally tap the directions to readjust your fire until the screen is clear of enemies. Then you move on and do it again on the next screen. It's scarily bad. It is the dregs of gaming. Absolutely, utterly never play this game. If someone offers it to you for free, you can bet that they actually hate you. If you ever come across it, avoid it as much as you can. For the 15th anniversary of Sonic, Sega decided to port the original classic to the Game Boy Advance. The game would not only play as it did on the Sega Genesis back when it was released, but it would allow you to save your progress, listen to the game's soundtrack, and even allow you to perform the spin dash attack, a move that was introduced in Sonic 2. Sonic fans would cry in joy as they would finally be able to play the very first game that started it all, in portable form and at a very tempting budget price. But the minute additions to the game are practically irrelevant after considering the many problems with it. The core gameplay is the same to be sure. Sonic will be running, jumping, and spinning through colourful zones, each with their own distinguishing characteristics, an awesome level design, but the game just cannot keep up with itself, and it shows by not rendering the levels quick enough. Just stopping and standing around for a platform to appear is not fun, and was not a part of the original game. There's also a ridiculous amount of glitches, causing the fast-paced gameplay to be interrupted by confusion. Half the time you won't even know what happened after you hit a spring or fall. It's just insulting that this port is this bad. Sure, you can now use the spin dash, but moving faster just makes the issues more apparent. Minor changes in the gameplay cannot help the fact that Sonic the Hedgehog Genesis is a lackluster port of an amazing game. If you desperately need a Sonic game for a handheld, pick up one of the Sonic Advance games for the Game Boy Advance or Sonic Rush for the DS, as they are both by far a much better option than what you'll get with this. Elf Bowling originally appeared as a freeware PC game back in 1999. It involves Santa as the bowler and his elves who were being turned into bowling pins after complaining about working conditions at the North Pole. You have to try to knock down the elves, but the elves will do their best to distract you. The screen is usually split into two, with the right side showing the elves, while the left depicting Santa and his trusty bowling ball. The ball rolls down the lane with no animation whatsoever, but the elves are cutely drawn and sometimes do wacky things like flash their butts at Santa. When it comes to the second game, there's slightly more animation. The main failing of both games is that there just isn't much to do in either of them. In the first one, you would launch the ball by pressing the A button when the moving arrow is exactly where you want it. Beyond that, there's no way to guide the path of the ball. You can't even specify how much power or curve to put into the roll. Elf Bowling 2 is slightly better, if only because you can adjust the aim and power of each shot by managing two separate indicators. Once you've played through the games once, you've experienced everything they both have to offer. It's quite disgusting that a company would pack two free games into one cartridge and expect people to buy it, especially when the two games in question are as ridiculously shit as these. I've always been a huge fan of the Mortal Kombat series, and with the news hitting that a port of the classic games would be making its way to my favourite handheld, I instantly jumped at the chance to play it. But this enthusiasm would be cut short the moment that I actually had it in my hands. Sure, everything looks like it's here, you've got plenty of characters and stages to fight on, but when it comes down to actually playing it, I'd rather walk into traffic. While this game seems to try to imitate the feel of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, it fails miserably from its horrid collision to poor control. Hits don't seem to connect properly. Projectiles will pass right through opponents like they weren't even there. It's really amazing how this game actually got passed for approval to shit. To make matters even worse, the game features the same schizophrenic AI that Mortal Kombat was famous for. This means that at any time the enemy will let you beat them and barely attempt to retaliate one match, then the next it will pummel you into the ground. And trust me, it can get cheap by blocking almost any and every attack you perform, while pulling off moves on you that are damn near impossible to defend. So why would Midway go and release a game that was so poor up to the market? Well, the reason Midway knowingly released such a poor quality game to the market is simple. They wanted to make a quick buck, so they passed the project to a low quality developer and simply rushed it out to stores on the unsuspecting masses, knowing that it would sell on the name alone. Overall, I would not recommend Mortal Kombat Advance to anyone. If you need a Mortal Kombat fix, then I would advise getting any other version before this one. Even the horrid black and white originals on the first Game Boy are better than this crap. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos. You can follow me on all of the socials. Which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skilljim, Nano, Steve, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Paul, Dio, Alex, Pierre, Carl, Strider and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting my channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links in the description as well. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.